Your B2B Marketing Pint is the podcast for B2B technology marketers who want to sharpen their competitive edge. Joined by other marketing veterans, your hosts Brian O'Grady and Brendan Ziolo share expertise on what works today and why. Grab a cold pint of hot takes on branding, content marketing, demand generation, and more, served with a side of sarcasm.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, all the ships at sea, this is B2B Marketing Pint. Buckle up. You're in for some learning. You're in for some fun. Brendan, who are we talking to?
Well, I have the pleasure today of introducing Pauline Kabitsis. She's a behavioral scientist. So all our fellow marketers are scratching their heads already, I'm sure. But she's done a lot of very cool work. I've seen a couple great presentations where she's used that background to not only guide product and features and development, but some tips for us marketers too. When she's not hanging out with Brian and I, she consults with Irrational Labs, who's worked on projects with companies that some of you may have heard of, like PayPal, Airbnb, and LinkedIn. And she also runs her own behavioral science and research consultancy called Decode. And there she's worked with maybe a few non-tech companies like UN agencies, World Bank, some health insurers, and I'm sure many, many more that she will weave into the conversation where possible. Like I said, I saw her present some great talks, and I couldn't wait to have her on the podcast. So, Pauline, what did I screw up on your bio? And welcome aboard.
No, you screwed up nothing. I thought most certainly it would have been the last name because that typically gets mispronounced, but it was perfectly articulated. So thank you both for having me. This is awesome.
All right. And as is tradition, which we prepped you on, what are you drinking today?
Oh, yes. So Brendan drove over to my place, a Lone Pine. So I have not had this before, but I do like IPA hoppy beers. And looks like it, I think you said, Brian, it was, or Brendan, you said it was in, where's the brewing company? I can't remember.
It's in Gravenhurst, and I think it's on the back there, Sawdust City Brewing Company. So,
okay, yeah, it is.
It's a good one, so hopefully you enjoy it.
Yeah, I'm excited. I was saying before we started that I feel like I've executed a lot of self-control because I have not opened it yet. Well, what about yourself?
Well, I am it's my dry January continues from 2021. So I'm still drinking non-alcohol, and I went back and got something from Harmon's, but most appropriate for time of year, a hockey beer called Overtime. So I have not had this, but I'm a big fan of Harmon's, so hopefully it's a good one. And Brian, what are you drinking?
I love the name of that beer. Well, it's not dry January here, although dry February is coming this year. There was travel involved, which meant that dry January was a non-starter this year. Because I'm coming to you live from Canmore, Alberta, where there's some pretty hot skiing. And I already owe Canmore an apology because what I should be doing, if we weren't so busy here on B2B Marketing Pint Bean Marketers, what I should have done is gone and checked out one of the amazing local brew pubs I saw when I cruised through town yesterday and brought something to the table. But I did not. I brought one of my old standbys. So as a result, I'm going to ask all the viewers in Canmore and lovers of Canmore beers to tell me what I should have brought to this episode so I can correct it next time. But instead, we've got a classic. It's hard to go wrong. Gotta love the Dutch.
Please, Canmore people, help them find a better beer.
For the record, there's nothing wrong with this beer, but a microbrewed Canmore special would be even better. Shall we? All right.
Cheers.
Cheers to a good podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Brendan's still pouring.
I'll keep pouring while Brian, you can kick it off so I can keep pouring my beer.
I love it. In that case, I will try to riff on your name since we haven't screwed it up yet, Pauline. And I'll say this is the beginning of us trying to kibitz with Miss Kibitzis. Thank you. And here's what we want to know, because I admitted this to you in our pre-show. I'm a bit of a fanboy of this topic area, and I may get a little excited. So let's go right to something that might also get another B2B marketer excited. If our fans, the B2B marketing fans, are listening to this over a pint, as they should be, and they're thinking, okay, guys, that's cute about the beers and the Canmore and stuff, but can someone tell me what's up with a behavioral science person with regards to marketing? I'm intrigued, but how the heck could I apply that in reality? Take it from theory to practice. Do you have a gem or a tidbit that one of our B2B marketing audience members could walk into a boardroom next week and apply?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a great question, because oftentimes when I enter a room and say I'm a behavioral scientist, people ask me if it's like a criminal minds thing and I'm analyzing their behavior and making my assumptions. But that's not actually the type of behavioral science that I apply. Behavioral science that I practice is the study of human decision making, and it uses psychology to understand why people do the things that they do. And then behavioral design is the application of that knowledge. So we use the knowledge of psychology to actually design products and services that make a desired action easier for someone to take. And the critical part here to really get right with behavioral design is that context really matters. So I know you said, what is one thing that they could take into their boardroom next week? And I'm going to give you a bit of a long-winded answer, and I promise it'll make sense at the end. But generally, when we think about marketing, we try to think about, reducing information overload, making our core message clear to our users, maybe using more colors to draw attention, less copy. That's sort of like marketing 101. You're both kind of nodding your heads, don't put too much text on the page. Even though this is marketing 101, by the way, I feel like I often see a lot of marketing materials that don't necessarily follow these very simple principles. But we'll leave that to the side for now. So let's say you work, though, in the marketing department for the government of Canada, for example, and you're trying to help Canadians register their businesses. Do you follow the same marketing principles is the question. You're still a marketer. You're just working in a different industry. And this is a question actually that a researcher by the name of Elizabeth Linos asked at Harvard People Lab. And they sent basically Americans two types of direct mail campaigns. One looked very markety. So it had all of those principles, bright colors, less copy, boxes and whatnot. And then they sent other Americans direct mailers that looked kind of boring, black and white, pretty standard layout, more text heavy. And what they really wanted to see is which of these two actually leads to more people taking action. And so before I reveal the answer, do either of you have any guesses of which of these two got more people to register their business? Go ahead, Brian. Hand raised.
Can you tell me more about the audience? As a marketer, I would have to ask about the audience so I know how best to approach them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the audience is a business owner, small business owner in Canada, and they are looking to do something to register their business.
Okay. Then off the top of my head, I will say the less bling that doesn't make it feel like I'm being pitched will outperform in that example.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Yeah. And so that is what they found. The more traditional, boring, designed marketing. Yeah. Have your sip. You deserve it. It caused 45% more people to actually take the action that they wanted them to take versus the very markety heavy example. And I say this because they asked people to make predictions like I just asked you, Brian. I may have teed you up here because I was a little bit priming in my response. But when they asked marketers which of these two forms do you think is going to be more effective, 89% of people actually went with that more markety version. So most marketers did think, let's apply all the same principles, less copy, bright colors, and more people are going to take action. And the reason the less design was actually more effective in this case is because it aligned with what we say in behavioral science is a consumer's mental model. So we have a sense of when I'm receiving information from the government, I generally have a sense of what that information should look like. And if it doesn't match my mental model, if it's too designy, then I don't feel like it's true information. It kind of seems like a scam. So the formal elements sometimes can actually signal a level of authority and consequence that you need, particularly if you're a B2B marketer working for a company like an insurance company, for example, or a bank. The type of marketing principles that you might apply there are going to look different than if you were, a B2B SaaS company marketing to your customers. And so I give this example because it's a very long-winded way of answering your question that there is no real magic bullet behavioral science principle that I can give to listeners today that is going to reliably kind of move the needle on key metrics. We always say in a field like this, the devil is really, really in the details. And so there's lots of principles we can draw from, and to know which of these principles is actually the one we should be taking, it really depends on, the consumer, the client, the context. So your question was absolutely straight on when you said, well, who's receiving it? Who's the marketer? And I would have to say, I need way more information before I can give you a principle that will move the needle for you next week.
That is awesome. And if I'd gotten it wrong, we just would have killed this episode and restarted. But because I want our audience to respect our authenticity and our alleged authority, that's why I'm not using my radio voice for this podcast. Brendan, over to you.
So great example, Pauline, and I like the context side of that. But I want to circle back to something else you said there, which was the overwhelming number of choices, number of words, number of colors, or whatever the case may be. And we see that all the time, even when the audience might be expecting or not expecting that. So again, to put you a bit on the spot, when it comes to whether it's dashboards or landing pages or emails or whatever the item is, and I know you said you always want a lot of context, so feel free to ask a follow-on question here or ask me for some info. But is there like a rule of thumb that you recommend people do when it comes to, cutting down on the clutter? Like, how do you get to that less is more context that, while it didn't work in your first example, would work in other ones?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'll go by saying that the reason we call this overwhelming amount of information overload. And it's basically counter to, I think, what sometimes people like to believe, at least when I'm working with them, which is like, let's give everybody just all of the information. And if they are knowledgeable and they have all of the right information, then they'll make the most utility maximizing decision. We'll make sure that they're armed with what they need. And as you both know, the reality of that is not necessarily true. We're trying to optimize our energy. We're not going to be reading all of that information. And so if there's one kind of rule of thumb that I could give to marketers listening to this podcast, it would be to take a pause before you design anything, whether it's a campaign, whether it's a dashboard, whether it's a landing page, and ask yourself, what is the key behavior that I want to drive with this marketing asset? And when I say key behavior, I mean, what is it that you want users to do or customers to do when they look at the thing? And that sounds really obvious, but I'll give you an example of something that we might use in our day-to-day that doesn't necessarily take this into account. So when you're using YouTube, for example, pull up, the YouTube homepage. If I were to ask you, like, what is the key behavior? What does YouTube want their customers to do? Most of the time, I get a swath of responses. People say they want you to search. People say they want you to click a video on the homepage. People say they want you to follow. It's very unclear what it is that they want you to do in the way that they've designed that homepage. And so you're not telling consumers, you're not telling businesses what is the next best action that they should be taking. You're leaving it up to them. Take that on the reverse and look at Netflix. Netflix is very, very articulate and clear about what key behavior they want their customers to take. In the first 7 seconds of opening the app, they want their customers to watch something. And so how does that impact or reflect in their designs of the app? Well, you see a really big top of fold trailer for a movie or a TV series that has been selected based on your algorithm to be highly likely that you will like. And it auto plays. So it gets you even more likely to then continue to watch it. And so I think the one thing you can really do to avoid the too many options, too much information overload, is to first define what action you want people to take when they look at your dashboard or your landing page, and then design around that. Make sure everything that you're putting on that landing page is driving toward that key behavior.
Yeah, that's awesome advice that I think every marketer forgets at one point, and many marketers forget many times. And I've been in the room where there becomes a massive debate when you do try and find the one thing, and you end up with 5 or 10 different answers, and then the end result becomes, well, we can address all of these. And that's, I think, where you end up with, it started cluttered, you met to simplify, and then you maybe even made it more cluttered in some examples. So yeah, that's a great reminder. And now we can all point to behavioral science in this podcast when the debate arises next time.
And it's funny, like if you're in a boardroom and you ask this question, it's like if you're confused as the designers of this product, like if multiple people in the room are saying different things, then like your user is for sure confused.
Yeah, and I found it interesting when you gave YouTube, because I thought, like, when you asked the question, I was like, well, let's watch a video. But yeah, you're right. I guess there are multiple answers there. But yeah, Netflix, it's crystal clear. And yeah, I've noticed the autoplay is sometimes annoying, but it's definitely driving an action. All right, Brian, why don't you queue up the next one? I think Pauline's doing too well here. We need to ask a tougher question, I think.
Make it a little harder.
Yeah.
I will. Thank you for that. I will riff on the previous with one augmentation. I hope it's an augmentation. One other thought. My theory on why that happens, what you folks just described, is that marketers work themselves out of the ability to understand their target audience, because day in and day out, you're becoming more and more expert on your topic, and you know too much. And then your audience, they don't care nearly as much about that topic as you do. They're showing up to solve problem X. They're showing up to watch a video. They're not interested in all the other things you've learned about it in your 3 years on the job. And so in my experience, we as marketers have to be careful not to work ourselves out of being able to talk to our target audience effectively.
Yeah, I do. I think that's probably why, like, behavioral science consulting, the industry I'm in, exists. It's like a fresh set of eyes to look at. Like when we work with marketers, you always get the response of like, oh yeah, we know that. But it's like, oh, you didn't apply it because you've been so ingrained in this like body of work, your consumers so well, or your clients so well. So sometimes you need that fresh set of eyes to say, hey, why are you actually doing this? Or why are you trying to target every audience segment here? Who's your, main segment? And let's focus the design on that.
Exactly. Okay, well, let's see how well the hottest industry right now is doing with this particular topic. If they're applying these principles or these concepts, or they need to relearn them all over again just because it's the hot new topic. We always like to include an AI question in our podcast because it's hard to do marketing today without talking about it. But is it working from your perspective as a behavioral scientist? Are they getting it right? Are they getting it wrong? Do the tools address the principles that you work with every day? If they do, great. But if not, what should they be doing instead?
I think we're still very much in like a learning and growth phase with AI. And so they're not necessarily hitting the nail on the head yet with marketing tools. But I do think eventually it will transform the way that we will do marketing. And I'll give you an example. I saw a company recently who is actually tailoring landing pages based on consumers coming into the flow, but more tailored than simply, geolocators or search terms. They're actually completely adjusting like the copy and the imagery on the landing page using AI and using predictive analytics. So it's not there yet, but I think it's pretty cool that that's probably something that will be quite highly effective given how personalized it is once it starts being sharpened as a tool. I think right now, I use AI in my work for marketing, and I'll ask it to like do a diagnosis, which is basically, look at the screen, look at the landing page, or look at this direct mail, or look at this LinkedIn ad, and look at it from a psychological perspective and diagnose like what are some of the key elements that might be causing confusion for a user. And what it does is it just gives you too many things. It doesn't offer a focus area. And so it makes it really hard to then design a solution because it's just telling you all of these things are of equal importance. And it's giving you basically a long list of like biases and heuristics psychologically. And I think that this is true. This is true in my line of work when we apply to marketing. I think this is also true when you just look at the way that marketers in organizations apply AI. You know, they use it to create the first draft. The first draft is extremely long. Oftentimes it's perhaps not as pared down as you would like it to be, or what it would be if you hadn't used AI. And it certainly doesn't have that one nugget or that one insight or the one thing that's really driving the campaign. It's really a collection of ideas. And so, yeah, I think that that's where we're getting AI wrong right now. It's giving us too much information and we're having a hard time figuring out what information is highly relevant and going to move the needle and what information is sort of tangential or secondary to your goals.
Yep, that jives with my experience with AI, where you ask a simple question, you get a 2-page answer.
Mm-hmm. And then it's creating more work for the recipients. Like it's so easy to create something now that we're all just stuck in this phase of like way too much information. Whereas before it took us forever to create something. So we were way more thoughtful about how we spent our time and effort on the insights in our white paper, for example.
Right. So I have a follow-on AI question. So, I mean, it's definitely becoming more prevalent in it's becoming more prevalent, period, I guess is the simple point. But in marketing, in particular for this podcast, like, are there any human behaviors or heuristics that you think marketers need to understand more of now and not less? Or like, are there areas of behavioral science that you think really become more and more important as AI, like you said, develops the first draft or reviews and gives suggestions or whatever the case? Like, what's the balance between AI and the human involvement, like from your perspective and your background?
Mm-hmm. One way I've been thinking about using it recently is to go back to first principles a little bit. So I used to like prompt it with like you're a behavioral scientist or you're a marketer and you are creating a Instagram ad for this company and you want it to be highly effective and include one CTA and whatnot. And I realized that it wasn't generating the type of recommendations that I, as a behavioral scientist, would actually recommend. And so I would go back to first principles and actually write down, like, what are the key things I want to pull out in this ad? Why do I think people aren't actually clicking through? We know that people have limited attention. We know they're scrolling through. I know the CTA button is not a color that anyone's going to notice behind or in front of that imagery that they have on that Instagram ad. And so it clearly sort of articulating out what it is that you want, what's the key behavior by yourself before you even touch an AI product, and then using AI as a partner to then co-develop the asset. I think that is where you get the most power out of AI, as opposed to relying on it to create a first draft and then working backwards, because it's really hard to remove things. We call that loss aversion, right? We feel losses twice as much as we feel gains. We feel bad, taking things out. It's a lot easier to add things back in. And so start with like, what are the key questions? What's the behavior you're trying to drive? Why is it hard for people to do what you're trying to get them to do? How would you make it easier? Give that guidance and then see what AI comes back with and pare it down from there. I think one other thing that kind of scares me about like the human element of AI is I've started to see synthetic users come about in some of the like user research work. And basically the idea is that you would train an AI model on like your existing customer data and then use those AI models to inform future designs of your marketing assets or your products. And so instead of interviewing a real user, you would actually like interview or ask for feedback from your synthetic AI user. And I think this is a really interesting but slightly scary notion, because we are essentially trying to get human insights from non-humans. So I will be very interested to see how that sort of area of AI develops, but I'm very skeptical about it right now, particularly as someone who studies human behavior and the quirks of someone's behavior. I'm not entirely sure. We do say people are predictably irrational, and you can predict oftentimes how they might behave. But I don't know if a computer should be made your synthetic user when you're user testing new features or new products or new campaigns, for example.
Cool. Having just watched some of the Alien series, I'm quite fresh on my synthetic humans. But I guess, B2B marketers are pretty familiar with the concept of personas, where in theory we define, well, this is Rhonda, she's left-handed, she's 45, and her concerns are this. And this is Bobby, and Bobby's concerns are different. And we're used to using those personas. If they were able to actually make that work and get those personas behaving like Rhonda and Bob, that could be very cool. I don't know if it'll work or not.
Yeah, I think that's why it's an interesting area to watch. And I think personas are really helpful because they're like nice heuristics and models for people to think about when they're creating their marketing campaigns, for example, or their assets. But I don't want it to take away from the human element of research, which is capturing the unsaid things, capturing things in the subconscious that you might observe people do, but don't actually do. And this is actually one of the faults of a lot of market research agencies, is that they'll ask on an interview, explicit, why do you like this or whatnot? And the classic response will be either to make the interviewer feel good, or they'll report on something that they think they do, but they actually don't do. There's a lot of things like, Brian, you said you should have gone to get a beer at a brewery and then you didn't, right? But in your mind, you're like, I would have done that. And you probably would have said, if I asked you before you went to Canmore, you probably would have said, yeah, I'm going to stop off at a brewery to pick up a beer for this podcast. And so if I used that for my my research, and then that was used to inform whatever it was that I was making after, I would be incorrect in my statement. And so it is really interesting to see how sometimes what people report is not necessarily how they behave in the real world. And I think if we start using synthetic users more for that type of research, we're going to get synthetic responses.
Yeah, self-reporting versus reality, not quite the same thing. I love it. Okay, well, let's get really real. We've been in the theoretical for a bit here, which I love, but there might be some B2B marketers out there saying, hey, I'm stuck in a feature war with two killer competitors. What can I do? What can I use behavioral science to do that's going to unlock some real engagement or some real revenue lift for my product or my service versus my competition? Because they're not clever enough, my competition, to listen to B2B Marketing Pint, but I am. So I want to go away with this nugget of what am I going to apply if I'm one of these companies stuck in feature war? How do I get some more money or some more engagement tomorrow?
Yeah. So again, I'll caveat this recommendation with it'll depend on your context, your product. But I think a lot of the times when we're building out new features, we think about making them as effortless as possible to use. Make it really, really easy. But actually, we see a lot that sometimes adding a little bit of friction can go a long way in creating perceived value for your product. So, for example, when Betty Crocker, the cake mix, launched way back when, they initially launched with just the mix and the water. So super easy to make a cake. All you had to do was put water into the mix. Nobody was using this, or very few. Sales was very low for them. So they started asking around, why are people not using our Betty Crocker mix? And eventually they came to the realization that people just didn't feel like they were baking a cake. There wasn't enough effort in the mix to make them feel like the cake was something that they had created themselves, that they would serve at a birthday party or to friends over dessert. And so all Betty Crocker did was add an egg to the mix. They said, okay, let's get the customer to do something. We're not going to create a lot of friction, but just a little bit of friction. We're going to get them to add an egg into the cake mix. And all of a sudden, they saw sales go up. And I use this as a metaphor for how we should be thinking about things, especially in the age of AI, where AI can really make things feel really magical and easy to use. And I would have you question whether or not you want to make it that easy to use. We actually seen a lot of academic research that's coming out right now that having people invest a little bit of time into your AI model, whether it's the AI asking you a few questions before it gives the output, or whether it's the AI telling you the effort it's gone into create your output, goes a very long way in getting customers to feel increased value in the product. And so, when you're launching that new feature, I would ask yourself, what is your egg? What is your egg in that feature launch?
I love it. That's a great example, and it triggers a memory for me from back in the Nortel usability lab days. I'm dating myself here. I know of a researcher who ended up putting a lead weight inside the handle of a new desktop phone that was super tech because it was just plastic and wires. It didn't need any weight to do its thing, but the perceived value was not there. It's just a piece of plastic. It's like a toy. So they put lead weights in the handles, and all of a sudden it felt like a $3,000 desktop phone or whatever the price tag was. So that's a great example. I never thought of adding friction. I do spend most of my days trying to remove friction from web experiences. So now I might try adding some back in. Great answer. Brendan, can you bring us home?
Well, first off, for the record, I'm sure I would have screwed up the Betty Crocker cake with mix and water. So I don't know if the egg is helping here, but it's good to know. And you'll be happy to hear, Pauline, after one of the presentations I saw you give, I actually used the friction example because someone was like, now personally, I still think he may have too many steps and too much friction. But it was funny because he's like, what would you do? And I said, well, before last week, I would have said 1 step, 1 button. But, and we had a long conversation about it because he saw it as a way to maybe get better quality, right? From the process. He's like, if someone's going to click, send me the doc, or I think it was try the demo or whatever. He was like, yeah, I get that. But he goes, is everyone just going to click that and they're not really interested? Whereas if we do, make them answer another question, then they're more qualified. So next week we see the results of our tests. So
you'll have to let me know.
We'll see how it plays out. I think we ended up doing a 3 and a 2-step process, and we'll see who wins. And then we may do a 1 step just to have the baseline there for future reference.
Good. Yeah. You'll have to let me know because even if you think about Noom, the weight loss, if you've ever gone through their onboarding, the number of steps is absurd. It probably takes 20 minutes. But they do it on purpose because they want people who are actually interested in weight loss, because if they're going to claim that their weight loss product works, they need people who are highly motivated to stick to the plan that they develop. And so, there's clever ways. Sometimes you actually want some more of that friction, especially depending on your goal.
Well, I know myself and I know Brian fairly well, and we could keep talking for hours. Brian wouldn't make it to the ski hill, which would be bad, and we'd have to get more beer delivered and all that kind of fun stuff. So, as has become our tradition, we're going to wrap it up with one final question for you, which is our myth-busting question. So is there one, widely held belief in B2B marketing, and I'm hoping we didn't steal it already with the friction discussion. So maybe another one that basically behavioral science has proven, is completely wrong. So something that every B2B marketer says, and you shake your head every time you hear it, and it's like, why do they still do this? So what's the myth you want to bust? The floor is yours. It's your time to tell them all to figure this out.
So I thought long and hard because I think one of the fun things about behavioral science is there's a lot of counterintuitive insights. But I always hear a lot of the examples I give are B2C because we work a lot with B2C organizations. And people always say, well, what about B2B? B2B is different. B2B marketing is so different from B2C. And I just want to bust that myth and tell you that it's not. And I'll tell you why. At the end of the day, who are you selling to when you're selling B2B? You're not selling to the enterprise as a whole. You're selling to Dave, the procurement officer, who needs to make sure that, he doesn't look bad in front of his organization. he made the right call. And so I would argue that a lot of the biases that apply and the heuristics that apply to B2C marketing are also quite applicable to B2B. There's obviously a little bit of variation there, right? Like B2B might have less price sensitivity. They might be more reliant on social proof because like they're more reactive to risk. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of principles that we use in B2C marketing when we think about consumer behavior that is directly applicable to B2B because the end consumer is the human. The end buyer is the human.
I can get behind that. That's a great summary. They're all humans in the end. And one of the more recent marketing concepts I've bumped into, particularly with social selling, is people don't buy from companies. People buy from people. And I think that's another way of expressing what you just shared there. And if we can keep that in mind, it's going to help improve a lot of user experiences, I think.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
All right. Well, on that note and on that myth, that we'll all have to go back to the drawing board and redo all our B2B is different messaging. Thank you very much, Pauline. It was great to meet you since we met fairly recently, and awesome that you were able to join us on the podcast. This is a fascinating topic, so hopefully you'll come back when we have more time and we can split that off. But really appreciate your time today and joining us, and hope the beer met your expectations.
It certainly did. Thank you for having me, and thanks for the extra Lone Pines, which I will most certainly enjoy over the very frosty weekend we have ahead of us.
All right. Everyone, if you like this episode, if you have any questions, comments, ideas for future episodes, definitely leave us a comment, and we look forward to more fascinating guests and topics in the weeks ahead. Bye, everyone.
Cheers, Pauline.
Bye.
Hey, folks, if you liked that episode, you won't believe the next one.
So don't forget to subscribe on your favorite platform and you won't miss out.
Or if you've got an idea we haven't thought of yet, hit us up in the comments. We'll cover that too.